here. We're going to try and get through this pretty quickly in respect for your time. We're going to start, though. We have to modify the agenda. There's a request to modify the agenda to add item 6F to the consent agenda. There's an addendum that was distributed in advance of the meeting, and there is a handout as well. And I ask for a motion to approve that change.
So move approval.
Okay.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. The agenda will be changed accordingly. Next item is going to be our public comments. We've had one comment submitted in advance from Steve Hansen regarding the equitable development addressing gun violence. That is included in your agenda. And for the public comment period, those who are here, we've received one thus far, and I'd like to invite Mr. Hansen to the podium to make remarks.
Afternoon. Included with your agenda are my written public comments, as was described earlier, on a comprehensive plan of action reducing Hampton roads as gun violence that builds upon the insightful framework Hampton City Manager Mary Bunting introduced to the mayors and CAOs in May. During my brief allocated time at the podium, I will focus on gun violence legislative priorities you will be discussing this afternoon. I trust you will independently study the attached plan of action, identifying additional pressing actions that cannot adequately be addressed during this comment period. Trauma is an undesirable outcome of societal inequity and can lead to gun violence. Gun violence solutions must be categorized with respect to their relationship to trauma, and solutions should be tailored to address each identified impacted neighborhood's primary trauma sources. Tier 1 solutions address the root causes of gun violence trauma, such as inequities related to unemployment, education, and housing opportunities. Tier 2 solutions address countering the effects of trauma, which may lead to gun violence. These trauma effects include poor mental health, hopelessness, bad conflict resolution, and similar effects. Tier 3 solutions attempt to tap down gun violence with actions such as increased gun control, electronic surveillance, and police deterrence. A solution addressing a higher tier often is more effective than a lower tier solution. Tier 1 solutions address causes rather than symptoms or deterrence. However, solutions from all tiers have a place in the solution mix when combined intelligently. Today's agenda includes discussion on 4 general regional gun violence / public safety legislative priorities. Of the 4, only one is a Tier 2 proposal entitled Conflict Resolution / Mediation Skills in School Curriculum. All others are Tier 3. Today's discussion needs to shift towards Tier 1, followed by Tier 2 solutions. Without addressing root causes, you will fail to get at the heart of the problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hansen, for those thoughtful comments. I don't believe there are any other public comments, so at this time, we'll move on to the Executive Director's report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My Executive Director's report is included in your agenda. Be happy to respond to any questions. There are a few items I'd like to touch on. First, beginning with today's agenda. We will be having several very important actions today, including requesting for action for approval of our consent agenda, an amendment to our HRPDC bylaws, accepting our audited financial statements, approving next steps on a regional housing conversation and strategy, and approval of our regional legislative agenda. As the chair indicated, I know everybody's schedules are very busy, but very much appreciate if we could hang in there and get those key items approved on today's agenda. Secondly, I'd like to very quickly introduce a few new staff members that we have that I wanted to make certain the PDC had the chance to meet today. I'm going to start with Simone Elmore from our administrative team. Simone, if you wouldn't mind standing. Simone comes to us after several years of administrative experience in the private sector, including working at Steel in the city of Virginia Beach, as well as Cavalier Ford. And you'll get to know Simone as well as Cindy on Kelly's team as you call in, and she works with you on both your capacity on the PDC and the TPO. Two really exciting additions to our Water Resources Department. First, I'd like to introduce you to Grace Hansen. Grace, if you wouldn't mind standing. Grace is our new additional HRPDC coastal planner joining Whitney Catchmark's team. She is a graduate of Middlebury Institute of International Studies in California, where she earned a degree in international environmental policy, specializing in ocean and coastal resource management. Did I get that right, Grace? Yeah. All right, I got it. But obviously with her credentials and background, we're really excited to have Grace join our water resources team. And then in addition, I'd like to ask Ivy Osmond to stand. Hi, Ivy. So Ivy is our new HRPDC Water Resources Planner 3, also joining Whitney's Water Resources team. She has a master's in ocean and earth science from Old Dominion University. She worked for the city of Manassas as an environmental program manager and as a water compliance officer. And most recently, she worked for the Hampton Road Sanitation District. So we were really excited to bring Ivy over to our team as well. If I could ask everybody to please welcome our new staff with a round of applause. Secondly, I did want to point out an item in my executive director's report, which we're excited about. First, I want to thank the city of Norfolk for hosting the first annual Datathon that you held in the city of Norfolk. And there were about 16 teams that entered the Datathon. Our group of HRPDC people, who I'll ask to stand in a minute, got together, and I was really excited when they agreed to participate and compete in the Datathon. The way it worked, I think about a week ahead of time, they received a topic that they would be analyzing. The theme was analyzing, promoting, and protecting biodiversity in Hampton Roads. Our team did a presentation on drowning nature, how sea level rise will impact Hampton Roads biodiversity. I sure hope you brought the bell then. Any chance anybody brought the championship bell then? But I'd like to ask our HRPDC team to stand. Out of 16 teams, the HRPDC team took the top award, number one. So guys, if you might stand, please. No championship belt today, so. But anyway, all kidding aside, thank you very much. In Norfolk, our team said it was a great experience, just a whole lot of fun. So thank you for that. And then the final thing I want to do is, and you'll see some information out in the lobby today. You're going to see some information at your place. And I'm normally not a note reader, but I want to be certain to get this correct, because I really want to ask for your help today and recognize the work of Katie Cullifer from our staff and Rebecca Easttip. We're promoting and celebrating today, October 20th, as Imagine a Day Without Water. It's a national day of action to bring communities and policymakers together to advance greater and more equitable investment in water. As we all know, water is essential and invaluable and in need of our support. And so far, just in the 2022 calendar year, we've seen dozens of communities from West Virginia to Florida to Mississippi to New Mexico experiencing devastating impacts due to their water, due to storms, heavy rains, flooding, drought, or even failing infrastructure. Unfortunately, many people or some people in our community experience their day or many days without water due to their inability to pay their bills. And we often take water for granted. I know I do. I get up in the morning and I expect my coffee to be there. But for some of our very own in our communities, many of our residents do have to experience a day without water. So that's why we're so proud that the HRPDC, working with other partners such as Salvation Army and HRSD, support a program called the Help to Others program, which is there to aid families who have experienced a financial hardship. Hampton Roads water and wastewater utility customers can receive up to $500 through this program for bill pay assistance through the regional program that's administered by the HRPDC in partnership with the Hampton Roads Sanitation District and the Salvation Army. Just a couple of stats. In FY22, we were able to help more than 400 families stay connected to this vital service by providing over $157,000 in assistance. But unfortunately, some had to be turned away. This program is fueled 100% by community donations, your donations, and your support is so vital so we can help our neighbors who are in need. Because, and this is really important, because of our partnership with HRSD and the Salvation Army, there's no administrative fees. Every dollar that's donated to this program goes directly to helping our neighbors. If you're inclined, you can learn more or donate by scanning the QR code that's at your seat today. You'll also notice when you had your lunchbox, the QR code was on your lunchbox. And even out in front here today, Katie and Rebecca have a large display where you can take a picture of that QR code. I'm just going to ask, we have a really nice video that summarizes this program. Dimitri, if you could go ahead and cue that up. It's only a couple minutes, but I think you'll find it.
For 20 years, we've been able to help people with their water and wastewater utility bills.
We do see a lot of folks that just report a one-time crisis. They just fell on hard times.
For instance, an elderly person that's on a fixed income, someone just lost their job, or even someone with a medical condition.
There aren't a lot of programs specifically designed for those emergency assistance situations, and that's what's really special about the Help to Others program.
If this program did not exist, we would have a large number of our community without the basic necessity of life, which is water.
They can't bathe, they can't wash their dishes, they can't wash their clothes.
When someone needs assistance, that we work with our local Salvation Army branches.
The Salvation Army would review their account for eligibility, and if it looked good, we would set up an appointment, do some light paperwork, and make a pledge to their water account.
As a community-based program, we work just on the generosity of community donors, and all of our donations go directly to helping local families in need here in the Hampton Roads region.
You can donate by going to the website at shareh2o.org. You can donate on the hrsd.com website when you pay your bill by rounding up the change. You can also donate by mail.
100% of the donations go directly to helping local families in need.
Please donate to help keep the water flowing for a local neighbor in need.
So the ask today is help us spread the word. We all have neighbors that we know could use this assistance. Help us. I believe, Katie, people can round up when they pay their utility bill at HRSD, and every little bit helps. So, Madam Chair, I'll turn that back over to you.
Thank you,
Excuse me.
Mr. Crum.
Here
Yes,
I am.
yes, Mr. Mayor.
Well, I just, Mr. Crum just, I don't know, I can't say he touched a nerve, but you did. And, you know, there are a number of things that are brought to our attention as elected officials. We hear about people, I think, maybe who are facing possibly eviction, maybe food issues. It's the first I've heard about water. And I don't think there's any community here that if we knew that this was an issue, and in all due respect to HRSD for what you're doing, I just applaud you for that. But I'm not sure if that many of us are aware of individuals in our communities that are struggling with the possibility of having water cut off or going without. And I don't know how big a problem it is, but I could say for Hampton, if we were aware, we would try and create something so that we're not necessarily dependent on the charity of others to help our residents. So maybe there's a way of our knowing more about it. Because I certainly, we would be more proactive in it. Again, it's not to take away from, what HRSD and Salvation Army are doing. We think that's great. But I think around this table, there are communities that say, hey, we're not aware of that. And if we were aware, we would try and be proactive in trying to address that. Among the other challenges we have, I just think that we would try and address that. And again, this is the first time I'm aware of it. I know there are other issues that come to our attention, but this is the first one with water.
Thank you, Mayor Tuck. I think that's, yeah, I actually worked with a family whose water was cut off, and you don't, till you see that, how critical it is. I mean, just thinking about not being able to, turn on the faucet or wash your clothes or all the other sundry things. Maybe we can bring this back and have some more data so that we can then share amongst ourselves and talk about ways where each of our individual municipalities can help. Would that work? Okay, great.
And Mayor, I want to thank you for those comments. And I think, what we could do is provide some data around the need and share that with you. And thank you for that leadership to point out that opportunity.
Okay, great. We are now going to move over to Mr. Mark Godoldig-Yatrovsky for the Community Advisory Committee report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the Community Advisory Committee met yesterday, and we had 2 items on the agenda. One was the report on the Hampton Roads crossings. There are upcoming public input sessions, and there will be sessions in several cities, as well as some pop-up sessions. So stay tuned for more information about that. The second was to consider the regional legislative priorities list that the TPO and PDC have been working on for a number of months. There was consensus by the Community Advisory Committee on most of the items. There was majority support for all of the items. The 5 items that had some difference of opinion, but by no means, it was not a major difference in terms of numbers. There were in the instances where there were reservations, it was 2 or 3 individuals. So those items, just for your information, the boat trail funding had 2 dissensions, dedicated state federal funding for flooding resiliency, 1, state support for offshore wind, 2, economic development site readiness, 2, and adequate transit funding, 1. There were also 2 very supportive comments from members of the commission on the offshore wind and economic development site readiness. There was 1 addition to the list that we received. The CAC is sending for your consideration a carryover item from last year's list having to do with adding flexibility to the Freedom of Information Act language regarding electronic participation in meetings. We are hoping that there will be an accommodation that brings that part to a level that we saw during the pandemic itself with the emergency declarations. So that is my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Godoldig-Yatrovsky. Appreciate that. We're going to move on to the consent agenda. Mr. Crum, do you have any comments?
Your consent agenda is included today and is submitted for your consideration for approval. I would remind everyone that we are adding our addendum that we distributed prior to the meeting. It's a resolution that authorizes our submission for two community flood preparedness fund proposals that were previously approved by the commission.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Madam Chair, I move to approve the consent agenda.
Thank you, Ms. Lucas Burke.
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Ward. Thank you. Any discussion?
Madam Chair, on the
Yes.
minute, yes.
Yes, Ms. Miles.
Good afternoon.
By the way, my apologies. Ms. Miles, I wanted to welcome you earlier. Our latest, newest member to the commission from Virginia Beach, Ms. Delcina Miles. Thank you
You
for
still owe
being
me
here.
lunch. Okay.
It's okay, Mayor Tuck owes me one, so, you know.
For the July minutes, I'll just abstain from that since I was not here, but the rest of the agenda I'm fine with.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the motion passes. Thank you. The next item we have is our HRPDC bylaws. And Mr. Crum, I'd like for you to explain that if you could.
Yes, so previously we had a reading before the commission and an overview presentation, proposed bylaws amendments that are included in your agenda package. We are permitted to approve the revised bylaws at a future meeting after the first review of those bylaws. Unfortunately, we did not meet the test of 2/3 attendance at our July meeting. Madam Chair, and as I look over to Ms. Arledge, I can confirm that we do have 2/3 attendance today. So we are able to approve these amended bylaws today. The largest change of the bylaws will be to move the annual meeting from October, which would be today, to January. And the main reason for that is it's something that was recommended by your Joint Personnel and Budget Committee to really get our election of officers in line with the November elections. To be clear, you could be elected to an officer position today, but depending on the outcome of November elections, not be a commission member in January. So we thought it best to move that annual meeting to the beginning of the year. We also then would move the election of officers to January. We did complete some other minor technical revisions throughout the bylaws. Madam Chair, I would request that the commission consider action today, a motion second and a vote to approve the amended bylaws as included in your agenda.
Great. Is there a motion to approve the amended bylaws as
So
presented?
moved.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Great, thank you. Any further discussion?
Could we, I think
We
that was
record Ms.
Ms.
Miles
Miles.
and Mr.
Second. Mr. Throw.
All right. Can't see that one part. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the motion passes and the bylaws are amended. And again, thank you all for being here for that. That was a big hurdle. We appreciate that. We'll now move over to my favorite item, most exciting item, our audit. And with us today, we have Mr. Thomas Capstick, who's here to present the audited financial statements.
Good afternoon, everybody. Y'all just ate, so I'll keep it brief. I know this is not the most exciting part of the day, but I'm Thomas Capstick. I'm an audit manager with PB Mares. This past year, we had the pleasure of doing the financial statement compliance audits for HRPDC. We presented these to the P&B committee this morning, so I'll keep it brief here. But we had unmodified opinions for all reports, so we had clean opinions there. We had no issues with management, no adjusting journal entries, no deficiencies noted. So really kind of just a boring, clean audit, which we like. If you're looking for kind of financial statement highlights, I'd refer you to the MD&A at the start of the financials for that. Otherwise, happy to answer any questions y'all might have.
Are there any questions from commissioners? Hearing none, thank you to PB Mares and for your team. I also think we need to recognize Ms. Sheila Wilson and her team for doing such a great job once again this year. We heard from the auditors that they wish that all of their clients had teams led by Sheila and her team. So congratulations.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's move on. I need a motion, if possible, to approve and accept the fiscal year 2022 audited financial statements as presented. Been moved and seconded. Okay, that was Mr. Keaton and Dr. Ward. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the motion passes. Now we're going to move on to the next agenda item, the regional housing discussion. And this is something I know all of us have been discussing for a while, and I'm really excited that Ms. Sharnita Bethea will be here today to lead us in sort of an intro of an opportunity for us to take this on a regional level.
No, I think just as a reminder, this is a conversation that, thank you, commission members, and I know Ms. Ritter, that important priority to discuss housing at a regional level in Hampton Roads. So our staff formed a team, and Ms. Bethea is going to share with you today a potential pathway forward. So Sharnita, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. I know that this has been a hot topic for a lot. Ms. Ritter, thank you for bringing this back to the forefront. A couple of months ago, Ms. Ritter posed a couple of questions about what we were actually doing as it relates to looking at housing in a regional perspective. So around the table, I know everyone was asking me about these little green teal cards here. I told a couple of fibs that it was for a raffle. Door prize for a ham or a turkey. I think I told City of Hampton. What I want you to do really quickly, and it's not a test, it's not anything that's going to kind of come back. Think about one word that describes housing to you personally and just jot it down. 10 seconds. One word that you can relate to in a personal perspective as it relates to housing for you. See some quick ones. And if anyone of our guests in the back would like a card, there's a few on the back corner as well. So just think about that really quick as we kind of move forward with this presentation. What we wanted to do, and our chair thought it was a little bit important to talk about our internal programs and what we actually are working on here at the PDC. So we're going to do a quick overview of the PDC housing programs. We're going to talk about the understanding the complexities of housing and how they intersect other sectors of our day-to-day lives. Pretty much look at what our housing climate is today, some of the things that are resonating up to the top as it relates to affordable housing, evictions, and foreclosure, and where you come in is a discussion. I want to hear from you all about what you see in your localities, where you see that we can move forward, and what those next steps would be. So right now, our core programs here as it relates to housing is that we are the administrator of home funds for our regional down payment and closing cost assistance program. We also administer what is called Virginia Housing's mortgage interest rate reduction, and that allows us to give a 1% interest rate reduction to what the market rate is currently. We are the project lead for Virginia Housing and the Virginia Association of Planning District Commission's Affordable Housing Initiative. And we also serve as the regional representative for various programs, advisory boards as it relates to housing and human services initiatives here. And we also staff support the Hampton Roads Housing Consortium, which is a coalition of nonprofits, for-profits, our housing authorities, as well as our government housing agencies. We're actually holding our 16th annual awards on the peninsula today, where we are actually recognizing 4 individuals in this area. Habitat of the Peninsula and Greater Williamsburg received the 3D printing award. Georgette Houchins for Virginia Housing and her development of affordable housing initiatives and mortgage. Hugh Forehand from Newport News Redevelopment and Housing for his lifetime achievement in creating community development. And the Up Center in Norfolk received an award for their work in consumer and financial education. So we're glad that we're in a position that we can still highlight some of the important work that we're doing in the region. So a quick snapshot of the work that we do in down payment and closing cost assistance. This is a project and a program from HUD, and we administer first-time homebuyer assistance to residents in Portsmouth, Chesapeake, Isle of Wight County, and Smithfield directly. We are their regional administrator for those funds. We also administer funding for Williamsburg, James City County, Poquoson, York County, and Gloucester that we share with Habitat for Humanity. This gives the opportunity for home buyers to receive a 0% interest grant from us that's forgiven as long as they stay in the property for 5 or 10 years. This assists them with their prepaids, their closing costs, and their down payment assistance piece. And for the most part, it primarily covers the largest portion of their closing costs that they are associated with. When we talk about the program, it's hard for some consumers to really understand the impact of where the program benefits and how it's used. So I gave you 3 different scenarios of buyers that we have worked with currently. We had a young lady from York County in Williamsburg that was a leasing consultant, found out that her son passed away, leaving her with 2 grandchildren to raise. And one of the first things she wanted to do was to secure a home for her grandchildren. So we worked with her with the County of York County's Office of Housing, as well as James City County Housing, to get her into her first home, and she closed 2 months ago. We had a 23-year-old in Portsmouth that was a recent graduate of the apprenticeship program and has recently moved over to homeownership. He was 23, he was young, he had all of his things in order, a little bit of spending issues that we worked with him and referred him to a HUD-approved housing counseling agency, and he is now a homeowner at 23. He was the youngest homeowner that we had until actually 2 days ago that we have a 21-year-old in Williamsburg that will be purchasing his first home, and he is an employee of Walmart Distribution Center. So we're exceptionally excited that we're seeing home ownership in our young community at this point. And we had another buyer in Isle of White County, bank teller, had rented her entire life. We looked at her rent payments, and actually her mortgage payments were a lot cheaper than her rent. So she was able to move into home ownership. So we wanted to paint a picture of the type of workforce that we're working with to put them into home ownership. The interest rate reduction program that I mentioned is a 1% interest rate program through Virginia Housing. And it allows us to buy down the rate, the current rate, 1%, in order to adjust so that the home and the payment can be more affordable. As you can see, looking at the examples, we're not seeing 3.25 or 2.25 right now. This was actually back in February, so we need to kind of adjust. We're running about 6% at this time, which is still historically a lower amount, but it still affects affordability when you're looking at 80% of the area median income and those clients needing to have a little bit more buying power on the market. This program is designed, there were 3 actual categories for Virginia Housing. It was special projects, it was high affordability areas, which Northern Virginia was in that, or you could actually apply for a minority wealth building initiative. So our PDC allocation was allocated for minority buyers. We were looking at the homeownership gap between our Latino, Latinx communities, Asian, and African Americans, and how we can strengthen the affordability of their purchases and make sure that we're looking at ways to improve them seeing homeownership as their goal. We were awarded 3.2 million in mortgage allocation credit for this program, and great, but sadly to say, we have already probably allocated most of our funding for the fiscal year because of the interest rate increases. Really quick, a couple of months ago, we talked with you about an initiative between Virginia Housing and all of our VA PDCs across the state, where they provided us $3 million in gap funding for existing projects in our region. We have been working with localities and have identified projects that will be receiving this funding. And what they were trying to accomplish with this program is to look at ways that, because of the increase in construction, because of the increase of labor, were there projects within your localities that just needed a little bit more seed money to get to the finish line? And that's what we have been working with as it relates to the projects that we are currently going to fund in this project. We wanted to kind of talk a little bit about the intersection of housing. When you talk about what does a regional housing plan look like, do we need a regional housing plan? Are localities able to go forward without looking at a more holistic and a more collaborative effort? We look at how housing intersects all components of other lifestyles and other sectors. You cannot purchase housing, you cannot create housing without looking at the health, your transit, your culture, economic development. We saw that a lot with Northern Virginia with the Amazon project. How do you create employment in order to make sure that housing is available for them? Poverty and wealth. We talked about crime. We talk about how do we increase home ownership? How do we increase wealth and quality of life and education and safety and well-being? So housing is not created in a vacuum. Housing issues cannot be solved in a vacuum. So how do we look at all of the silos that we typically look at? When you look at economic development, are we making sure that we're injecting housing options into those? When we're looking at transit, are we looking at transit oriented development? Are we looking at ways that clients can get back and forth between work? So we have to look at it in a holistic standpoint with that. Recently, we attended a session with Delegate Price on the peninsula back in the summer. I think Mayor Tuck was there. And we went around the room similar to the square that you all have. And we asked each housing provider, what is your most pressing issue? And of course, we got several different answers as it relates to whoever that person was. So when you're looking at housing, and it depends on who you ask and at what life cycle, we have kind of broken it down into 6 categories. When you look at the affordability issues with rent, eviction crisis that we saw a couple of months ago and we're still in, the usage of housing choice vouchers, short-term housing is becoming a key issue in most of our localities, affordable housing stock and as relates to home ownership, the lack of resources to get clients into homes and where those homes are located. We also in our region have to look at our special populations as we age. What are we doing in terms of senior housing? What are we doing in terms of housing that is accessible, that you're able to age in place without modifications? Veteran housing for our retired veterans in our region. And what we have also seen currently is military housing. We have seen a increase of the fact that their BAH that they are receiving is not able to cover the affordability as it relates to them finding housing as it relates to their base and where they're located. Existing homeowners are looking at aging housing stock. You're looking at foreclosures. Are you able to age in place? And whether or not there needs to be rehabilitation on these units. Poverty continues to be an issue as we think about housing, as we think about what measures we need to put into housing. How do we continue to look at ways to deconcentrate poverty? How are we going to look at housing as it relates to crime reduction, mobility, and safety? And homelessness again. Traditionally, we're looking at housing as it relates to the spectrum. So from traditional housing, from transitional to shelter housing to permanent supportive housing, all of those are the components of housing as it relates to pressing issues in our region. As complex as housing is in terms of the different sectors, there are a lot of key players in housing. It's not just HUD. Most of the time we hear housing, HUD, those are the only 2 players in there. But from the federal standpoint, HUD is a huge player, of course, but we do see Department of Health and Human Services, Department of Justice as it relates to ensuring that residents that are in institutions are able to age back into the communities. And we're looking at Department of Agriculture and Veteran Affairs that also has a key footprint into housing. From a state perspective, we're a little different than most states. Most states have one state finance office. Our duties are split between Virginia Housing and the Department of Housing and Community Development. We also have Virginia Department of Professional and Occupational Regulations, which is DPOR, and the Virginia Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services. Regionally, we look at our nonprofits, we look at our trade organizations, our faith-based organizations have a lot of footprint in housing. Our healthcare systems are getting into more inclusive health as it relates to housing initiatives, and our government. And from a local perspective, we look at our zoning, we look at codes, we look at planning, our land banks, our housing authorities, civic leagues and neighborhoods, but most important, what we see is your public and political will. That sometimes shapes how housing is produced or how housing is created in those areas. When looking at regional and sub-regional issues, I wanted to kind of bring your attention to some of the things that we see right now on the ground as it relates to specific issues in Hampton Roads. Evictions and foreclosures continue to be an item that we are looking at. There is still money in the mortgage relief program. There are some clinics that DHCD and Virginia Housing has put together to link buyers that are still in risk of losing their homes to those services. Rental conditions as it relates to affordability. WHRO, NPR, and ODU released a state of housing in their State of the Region report. There was a huge piece on the affordability of rent. Fair housing, even though fair housing increased their protected classes to include source of income, we still see that this is an issue in our region. The utilization of housing choice vouchers. There are housing authorities that have vouchers, but unfortunately their residents are unable to find fair market rent that is affordable for those. Rising home values. We talked about housing for the military, homelessness. We have the task force that has been meeting regularly on the crime and the violence in our region. And we're also looking at legislative priorities. So I asked you a question to write down one word that describes housing to you. Does anyone want to share their one word? I'm not putting anyone on the spot. Did anyone want to, okay, right. Limited. Okay.
Essential.
Essential.
Security.
Security. Anyone else?
Safety.
Safety.
Comfort.
Comfort. Affordability. Dignity. Now, when I was asked that question early on, in terms of, and sometimes that word changes in regards to your life cycle. So I would say early on, as my being a first-time home buyer, I think it was wealth. I wanted to build wealth. And then as you get a little bit older, it became pride, that you were proud to be a homeowner. You were proud of where you lived as a renter. You liked the fact that you could come onto this place. At this age, it's peace. It's a sense of peace for me. That's my haven. That's where I want to go. Even as a child, some days when I get rough and things get rough, I think about going home to my parents' house and getting in my big canopy bed like I did. So housing means a little bit different to everyone. So when we had a robust conversation with the Community Advisory Committee a couple of months ago, and we had a great debate on affordability. And some around the room was saying, if the rent is $2,800 and people are able to pay $2,800, where's the fault? And we had other people around the table saying there are people still struggling to pay $2,800. And we got into a wonderful conversation about Wallops Island and the necessity to continue to educate engineers to work at this facility. And we're going back and forth and everybody's having a robust conversation. And our housing specialist kind of stopped and said, it's wonderful to have housing for the engineer that's working there and they're able to pay $2,800. But it's even wonderful that that janitor that cleans that facility is able to go home from affordable housing. So we use this because it really captivates what we're looking for. Is our goal in the region is looking at what adequate housing is for all. If you are retired and you're looking to downsize, can you find a a place that's affordable to you after you've worked 30 years. If you are a newcomer in the community and you're wanting to find your first starter home, can you find that housing? If you are recently disabled and you're needing something that you can assess and you can walk around with, is that option available to you? So we use this. I tell Bob, I think that our new tag for this initiative is adequate housing for all, and what that looks like for you in that cycle. And when you talk about the key factors of housing choices, anytime you're looking at rental, anytime you're looking at home ownership, it's typically three things you're going to look for: type, the cost, and location. So in terms of type, if it's a starter home, if it's single family or a townhome or a condominium, if it's multifamily home, what is that type? Of course, cost will also always be probably the number one thing that you have to consider. And location. Is it near my work? Is it near transit or transportation? Is it around my community and my culture? And that plays a big role in how people feel safe and they feel a part of their communities. Is it safe? And of course, we always hear that schools is a big part of that. So what's next? We're trying to continue to have these conversations with various groups. Next month, we will be doing a regional communication with the Hampton Roads Community Foundation that we're going to talk about what regional housing looks like. We want to understand who the players are, what does housing and how does housing intersect with other health, economic development, and transportation. We need to do a housing assessment, assess what programs we have, what are our housing types, or do we have the right housing types for our future, and what do we know and what do we don't know. As Mayor Tuck brought up, even with the H2O program, how do we get the awareness out that number one, there are citizens having issues and there are programs that we need to connect them with. And after we do this housing assessment, how do we then prioritize with the region? What does the region need to complement what is already here? And how can we build on the strengths and the integrity of the individual localities that we have around the table? The bigger questions also is who should lead this initiative? Who are the key players that should be around the table when we're having these conversations? What other voices need to be here that we have not thought about in the past? As we have always seen, housing was separate and economic. When you go into your localities, your zoning is separate from your codes, it's separate from your housing. How do we integrate all of those voices? And what other financial support would we need to truly do a regional assessment and figure out if we're where we need to be competitive in the workforce, to be competitive when we are attracting new business and jobs, and to be competitive that we're in a position that as our population ages in this region, that we're ready for whatever those needs are. So this is our team, internal, that we have been kind of around the table for a while, figuring out what these pieces should be. Of course, you all know Greg Rutendorf. He's our chief economist and he is our data person. He is always kind of keeping us grounded as it relates to gross national product, where we are in terms of other metropolitan areas, and how do those numbers match. Deidre Garrett is our housing specialist. She works predominantly with our first-time home buyers, but she is on our team. And John Harbin is the senior regional planner. He has started doing some amazing work with our planning directors, with introducing housing, zoning, codes, and compliance, things of that nature that kind of intersect with housing. So we've been doing some internal conversations. We have been working with other groups such as LISC of Hampton Roads. They had decided to venture out to do a smaller subset of a housing assessment, and we asked them to put it on hold until we kind of figured out what we were doing as a region. So we're doing these community conversations to kind of see where we are and what those needs are. And I'll stop right there. I know that was death by a water hose with a lot of information at one time. I just wanted to give you all the nuts and bolts of what we have been looking at and answer any questions that you all may have and really open it up to any discussion. And I am expecting Ms. Ritter to have something because we've been really wanting to bring something back with you to make sure we can start this conversation.
Thank you, Sharnita. Thank you for all that your team does. And a great presentation. First comment. Yes, sir.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Bethea, great report. I have one question regarding you overseeing the home funds. The localities that you serve, how do they find out about the program? And my follow-up question is, do you provide home buyer seminars, first-time buyer seminars or classes so folks can understand financial literacy, credit, and the types of things it takes to own a home?
Okay. So most of our clients come from a couple of different ways. Most of them is generated through our website, and we have a strong partnership with lenders and realtors that also pipe clients back to us. We work with the local housing authorities and the other nonprofits that are actually doing the first-time homebuyer classes. There is another group of nonprofit HUD-approved housing counseling agencies that we partner with. We are certified, but because of time and space, we can't conduct those first-time homebuyer classes internally. But there's a network of other nonprofits such as the Urban League, Catholic Charities, Hampton Redevelopment and Housing, or HUD-approved housing counseling agency, the STOP organization, and the Up Center. So we partner very hand in hand with those organizations that once we see they are a candidate for first-time home buyers in the grant, we refer them for the first-time home buyer and pre-purchase counseling.
Thank you, and a wonderful presentation, and if I can make two comments. As people know by my accent, I'm not from down here. We could always get together for coffee and talk, but I am from Newark, New Jersey. And I was born there and I worked in a hospital there for 7 years. And there was one section of Newark that had projects, high-rise projects that were high poverty, high crime. They eventually took them down and built affordable homes where people could afford to live there. And it really turned out to be a game changer to the extent where Newark took this on as a major challenge and became known as the Renaissance City. So, once again, I think that, there are tangible benefits to doing what we're doing. The other thing is that we as a region are on the cusp of some transformational progress in terms of with Andrea bringing in the hot, the ring and the technology and everything, that we're going to be looking at an explosion. We're telling people right now, friends don't let their friends' kids to move to Northern Virginia. We'll find you jobs here. That's the one thing about bringing jobs, but finding housing for them is going to be the challenge, and especially, affordable housing. And but once again, we're all in the same kind of boat. We're running out of land in a lot of ways, and a lot of with the storm water regulations, there's kind of a conflict that are escalating the prices of home projects, hence raising rates and affordability and things of that nature. And then also a major thing that being part of the Military Facilities Alliance, housing was identified as a major impediment to people that live on the bases or have to live out in the communities and things of that nature. And, once again, we realize that finding the affordable housing to allow people to come here, our children to stay in the area, we'll create the jobs with the new technologies, but unless they have a place they could afford to live. And we still have a lot of folks that, are making pretty close to minimum wage. And we got to get that bumped up to beyond living wage. And if I do that, Delcino and I are with the Workforce Alliance, as many people are here. Kenny Alexander, we got to use Centura College. Not everybody's destined for college. And so, people can get a job as a welder or as a pipe fitter or HVAC, make a good wage. That'll help. But unless we tackle the problem and the challenge, let's just call it a barrier to success and be popular. But, we got to make it. I know in Virginia Beach, it's a very high priority. And I think regionally, it's a very, very high priority. And, I think we're willing to commit to, do what's necessary or serve on any panel or anything. I know I will personally do it.
Thank you, absolutely.
Because tell you what, we can't grow as a region unless we tackle this problem.
Mayor, I can't tell you how many calls we get on a week-to-week basis from parents of recent graduates, and they say, can you please get my son or daughter out of my room over the garage or out of my basement? So the look of affordable housing is changing, that we have instilled in our children to go out and get their college degree. They will find this wonderful job and get a house, and we're finding out that that connection is not where we thought it would be. So I can't tell you how many mothers and fathers call us, and they're doing the research because they want John or Jane to move on into their own house, and how hard it is, that even if parents could give them assistance with their down payment, there's just not quality housing for them. So we're seeing the face of what we call affordable or workforce housing changing.
And the other thing is too that we have an interest in locally in Virginia Beach and other areas for these little tiny homes. And I'll tell you what, if you go to YouTube and check out some of the tiny homes, they're very, very livable, and it's a start. And but once again, the dilemma is that we have trouble finding the land to put it on.
Absolutely.
But the thing is, we have these barriers to success. But I think the one thing our group has, come together, if we use it in combination with, creating those, jobs where people are making, better money that they could afford to live there. But not everybody's going to be able to do that. We still have a heavy service tourist industry here where the salaries may not be great. But once again, I think before you can fix a problem, you got to realize what it is. And I thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Dyer. Ms. Ritter?
Thank you. I'm going to apologize. That's a really important thing that I have to be at. Thank you for the report. I think we'll all look forward to your next step and what we all need to do to participate. I would just say, I think my husband and I believe our greatest contribution is
three adult children who live on their own and pay their own bills. So we're very happy about that. But we also have those who lived in tiny homes in apartments in Manhattan. And not something they enjoyed whatsoever. So just a word of caution. So I look forward to the next steps, and thank you so much. It was really a good background. And what I really hope is that the regional model will be something that's adaptive to locals. And I'm going to take one point of personal privilege before I run to say I want to particularly thank Mayor Alexander. It's a totally different subject, for his leadership and the leadership of Norfolk in putting together and help with the governor and the AG these new programs on violent crime. It was very instructive. I was honored to represent our city, and this is all going to dovetail together.
Absolutely.
And I hope that we will take very strong note of all the work that's gone into this and how much all of our communities can benefit. Mayor Tuck was there. I'm sure he and Mayor Alexander could talk quite a bit about it, but it was a very hopeful afternoon for sure. And I'm sorry to do that personal privilege. Thanks again. This was terrific. I really look forward to how we're going to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ritter. Ms. Miles?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Bethea, a couple of things. Are we looking at making sure that we're identifying the type of housing for the next generation, because the type of housing they're looking for may not be the housing that we're accustomed to, or our grandparents are accustomed to make, and also making sure that the development community, the builders are at the table to see if there's a model that makes sense for them from the business side. And we know that costs aren't going down, but what model, what financial package works for them so they can start building that affordable housing, not just the existing housing. Thank you.
Thank you. All great questions. I'm excited to have so much discussion here. I'd also point out that, you know, folks who might want to live where we do have some of our municipalities around here that have land available, but we don't have public transit there. So that's a huge piece of the puzzle too that was already pointed out. With that said, in terms of action items and moving forward, I'd like to propose the creation of a subcommittee to focus on this, to include not only commissioners, but also folks from the private sector, the nonprofit sector, HRT, and others to start to delve in on this and bring back a report. It's going to take a while for sure, but I think this is a good first step. And I'd like Mr. Crum to then talk more.
I apologize. I just did want to add the second part of this that our staff recommends to you is we really think we need a regional housing assessment. We really think we need to bring someone in with an independent analysis and give us a good benchmark of where we are. As Sharnita just described, this is an incredibly complicated issue with a holistic set of issues we need to consider. But there's so many things happening in this housing market now that it's really hard to understand. And I think that we, in addition to that committee, would like that committee to really help us with how do we complete that assessment.
So let me clarify. Thank you, Bob. So the committee's goal would really be to identify what that study would do and, you know, what the deliverables would be. That, not that they themselves would be providing the deliverables, but we will work with consultants who are expert in that area, but we'll be guided in the RFP, the RFI by that subcommittee. So with that said, I'd like to entertain a motion to allow me as the chair to stand up that subcommittee. Is there such a?
Second, Bobby Dyer.
How about we start with a motion, Mr. Dyer?
A motion to approve, Bobby Dyer.
Second.
Got it. I like it. Okay. Any discussion?
Yes.
Yes, Mayor Tuck.
I think we have a committee in place. There's a question to expand what we have to bring in those other partners.
I need a point of clarification from Mr. Crum.
Well, I thought I was a part of an initial meeting that was a subcommittee. And so I'm thinking the committee already exists. So now we're talking about what Mr. Crum said, the housing assessment, and what the recommendation was in terms of looking at the future or the present as it is now, but also just expanding that group. What I thought I heard you say is that we're now going to create a subcommittee, but there is a subcommittee or a committee. So maybe I'm wrong in my interpretation of things.
So thank you for the question. So just to clarify, we began with sharing information on a potential strategy with Mayor Tuck from the Peninsula as TPO chair related to transportation issues and Chair McClellan. And Mayor Tuck, we would really appreciate the opportunity to add to that initial core as you're outlining. So starting with you and Ms. McClellan as the current chairs of our two main regional boards, and then supplement that. It's never been quite approved by this group as an official subcommittee, but we would absolutely like to build on that group and the staff that we had there in that initial meeting. Thank you for that question.
Any other questions before we take a vote? I will say that.
Madam Chair.
Yes, sir.
I do have a question to follow up with the mayor. So is that the additional members to the committee, those members that you are selecting, or can you volunteer to be a part of that committee?
That was the comment I was just about to make, which is, yes, I have ideas, but if you all have ideas and or are personally interested, please let me know within the next week. That would be great. because we would love to have your participation. I've heard some folks already raise their hands, so thank you.
I'll give Councilman Brown my spot.
Okay. I love it. I love it. Okay. No further discussion. So all those in favor of standing up the subcommittee signify by saying aye. Any opposed? Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Zia. The next item is our regional legislative agenda, and y'all are doing great. This is the last item that we need to vote on, so I appreciate everybody's patience. And this is an important one because we need to get started on getting all of our documents created to get those out to our friends in the General Assembly. So Mr. Crum, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commission members, really appreciate the opportunity to present to you today our proposed regional legislative priorities as we move forward with the 2023 General Assembly session. I'll do my best to move quickly while trying to balance giving you enough information to understand our perspectives on these important issues. This is our Regional Legislative Committee, which we formed last year for the first time. It consists of the leadership of both the PDC and the TPO, as well as our Regional Chief Administrative Officer Committee. Really appreciate their participation and involvement to help guide this effort on this regional legislative agenda we're going to discuss today. A couple of guiding principles. Our regional legislative agenda is complementary to local legislative priorities. We are not in conflict with locality positions. Our regional agenda, when effective, should have a short list of regional priorities, and we really need unanimous approval on those legislative priorities. Madam Chair, you've heard me say this, that unfortunately, what I'm going to share with you today is not a short list of regional priorities. On the good news side is it is really impressive what I think we could agree to as a region, as a Hampton Roads region. So I really appreciate the chance to walk through this for you today. Last session, we were excited with some progress on funding for the I-64 gap, returning the third passenger rail train, or having the third train to Norfolk, the second train to Newport News, and some progress around economic development site readiness funding, flexibility for broadband funding that we've already taken advantage of as a region. And with Ms. McClellan's leadership, some really important conversations around coastal resiliency and Commonwealth flooding that we really were able to spearhead some conversations on. I'm going to talk about ERC tolls in just a minute with some background. But this is the process that we've been on since we first introduced on July 21 some initial ideas for legislative priorities to you. I won't go through all these meetings, but we have met with a variety of committees and working groups to receive input on the priorities that are included in the package today. Earlier today, your HRTPO board approved the following transportation legislative priorities. Those include full funding for the I-64 gap, continued progress on reducing the impact of the tolls at the Elizabeth River crossings, and reducing their impact on our residents, enhanced passenger rail connections from Hampton Roads to the I-95 corridor, funding to construct the extension of the Virginia Capitol Trail through our region. I'll talk about that in a little more detail, and preserving and providing adequate transit funding for all of our region's 3 transit systems. Before I go on to the 64 gap, I'd like to talk a little bit about the ERC toll agreement. And there's some mayors here, such as Mayor Tuck, Mayor Alexander, and others that really put a lot of work into this, and we're really starting to see some progress. The TPO members know, but for the PDC members, the ERC agreement was signed between the Commonwealth of Virginia and a local or a private entity, with an agreement that the private entity would finance and construct the downtown and midtown tunnels in the Martin Luther King Expressway. The state at that time did not have available funding, so when the agreement was signed, it was signed between the Commonwealth and the private entity. And of course, the private entity, to pay back that investment, was able to impose tolls
that have a pretty steep climb as they escalate over the years. And those tolls had significant impacts and continue to on our residents. Really pleased that we have seen at first, an introduction of a low-income toll assistance program, and secondly, starting on November 1, a significant increase in that low-income toll assistance program. Effective November 1, that program, with monies provided by ERC, will increase the low-income toll assistance program from $500,000 per year to $3.2 million per year. Residents, those monies do not come from the state. They come from everybody's local tolls, but they'll be that $3.2 million will be used to assist low income or residents. The income range is being increased from $30,000 per year to $50,000 per year, and it's based on an individual's gross income, not family income. They will, and there will be no enrollment period to make it easier to enroll. You'll be permitted, if you meet the requirements of the program, to go through the tolls and receive refunds up to 10 trips per week. And those monies will show up on your Easy Pass account within 24 hours. Still work to be done, but mayors, thank you for your advocacy and work, but this is a pretty significant step. The other thing I wanted to mention is previously the only residents that were eligible for the toll relief were in the cities of Norfolk and Portsmouth. Any resident that meets these income requirements living anywhere in the 17 locality blueprint will now, in Hampton Roads, will now be eligible. So this is a pretty significant step for us. So we want to continue to look at ways to improve this situation, but we're excited about this step. And you can expect to see for your residents some information going out on this very, very soon. I-64 gap. We have funded with our own regional local tax money through HR TAC $311 million. To widen I-64 from Jefferson to exit 234 west of Williamsburg. That leaves us a 29-mile gap from exit 234 to exit 205, which is Bottoms Bridge right near 295. The cost of that 29-mile gap is $750 million, with 20 miles of that 29 miles located outside of our region. We advocated last General Assembly session, just to move quickly through the presentation. The Commonwealth of Virginia has, coming on our last General Assembly session, allocated $450 million towards the I-64 gap. In addition, we have a federal funding request that we work with the state to submit for another $150 million, and our friends in Richmond have allocated $100 million. So we're getting close. 700 of the $750 million, it looks like we have a good chance to secure. The Secretary Miller hopes come spring to be able to release a request for interest and qualifications with the hope that they would be able to build this in the 2027-2028 timeframe. So really exciting progress. We've got to stay on this to finish the job, but we're getting close on finally completing that gap. The next item is advocating for funding for extension of this 52-mile Capitol Trail that goes from downtown Richmond to Williamsburg. Our vision and goal is that today the top of the peninsula and Williamsburg and James City counties, one end of a 52-mile trail, and we want to extend that trail down both the peninsula and the south side. To really make our region the center for biking and walking in Eastern Virginia. We're working with a group of CAOs very carefully and meticulously as we look at funding opportunities to extend that trail down the south side. We were excited to support Virginia Beach with their grant proposal recently to extend from the Newtown Road Station, a light rail station, down to Virginia Beach Town Center and having a pedestrian walkover at Independence. We submitted a piece, an application for smart scale funding through Newport News recently, and look forward to continue to collaborate with our localities to advance this trail. The good news also is that the state budget does have not enough, but just shy of $100 million for funding for bikeways in Virginia. When you think about that conversation, a lot of times it's about the big three. We hear about the Fall Line Trail in Richmond from Ashland to Petersburg. We hear about the beautiful Eastern Shore Trail that goes up the railroad right away on the Eastern Shore, and the Shenandoah Trail. But we want to make the big three the big four, and ask the state to please invest in our boat trail, our Birthplace of America Trail, which would extend the Capitol Trail through our region on both the peninsula and the south side. Okay, moving on from the transportation items, this next set of recommendations comes to you from your mayor and CAO roundtable on crime and violence prevention. And again, I want to thank our mayors and our CAOs for their careful deliberations on recommendations for some legislative priorities under public safety. The first item they're recommending for your legislative agenda includes temporary detention order rules. They would ask for state assistance to decrease the time demands that temporary detention order, or TDO, rules place on our locality police departments. What is happening in the current situation is that with the lack of funding for our statewide mental health programs, that when individuals need escorted or taken to a mental health facility, many times, most times, those responsibilities fall on our local police officers. Many times what that results in is transporting these individuals and supervising them to areas outside of our region. And many times what happens is 2 or 3 police officers from our localities are out of our region 72 hours or more to fulfill these duties. Ms. Jarrett gave an example of having approximately 20 police officers in her cities, and many times she's losing 10% or more of her police force to fulfill these duties. So the mayors and CAOs would like to request state funding to provide needed mental health resources and staff so that we can transition TDO responsibilities away from local police officers. They would also like our local governments to have flexibility for other qualified professionals to perform these TDO duties, and even allow local governments to contract for these services to reduce demands on local police forces. So that's their first recommendation under public safety. Their second recommendation has to deal with conflict resolution, and that is requesting that the state incorporate conflict resolution and mediation skills into our K-12 school system. And they feel so strongly that they believe they should be included as a component of our standards of learning. More and more, we're seeing young people get involved with situations and violence, et cetera, at a very young age. And the thought here is that by encouraging conflict resolution skills and teaching those school skills, that we can help people make other decisions. And I know that from our police officers, we hear many times that, you know, it's sometimes these choices of how these conflicts are dealt with that really gets us into some of the terrible situations that we're seeing in our community. The next falls under retired law enforcement. The mayors would like state authorization through the Virginia retirement system to allow retired law enforcement officers to perform full-time duties to address local public safety needs. Right now, due to VRS requirements, they're not able to come back out of retirement to perform those full-time duties. And with the shortage we're seeing in police personnel, our mayors and CAOs believe this would be a very important step. And then finally, under public safety is technology. Right now, our code's a little interesting in terms of language, not real clear of how much you can use technology for violence prevention, for crime, for enforcing or even prosecuting. So they would like to request that priority be given to a study that evaluates the Code of Virginia to determine barriers and opportunities regarding the use of technology to address violence and crime. Other recommendations for your legislative agenda from your Coastal Resilience Subcommittee are under Commonwealth Resilience. We lead with Commonwealth. This is not just a Hampton Roads issue. Flooding is a statewide issue. We want to request that the Commonwealth of Virginia establish a dedicated, reliable, and ongoing funding source for flood prevention projects. You all know, I know Norfolk has done some work, Virginia Beach has done work, Hampton's done work. Some of these projects are going to be in the billions. The cost is significant, and we really need to have that type of a source, not only to help assist you as local governments, that frankly, local match to unlock federal funding opportunities, and we're not going to be able to do that without that dedicated source of funding. And then the second item is to protect the Commonwealth's bond rating. We're asking that the Commonwealth create a structure for coordination between state agencies, departments, and regions, and consider requesting a study on a structure that ensures this type of a collaborative approach. The bonding agencies, as you all know, particularly our city managers at the table, are beginning to ask what our strategies are on flood prevention as they look and evaluate our bonding capabilities. What we see at the state level is, whereas you have a Commonwealth Transportation Board to deal with transportation and bring alignment around that issue, we don't have any such structure when it comes to resiliency, flood prevention, those type of issues. So we really think that we can work with the Commonwealth to look at creating that model. Some other things that we're recommending for legislative priorities include state support for Jefferson Lab. We discussed previously that Jeff Lab is in a competition for a supercomputer that could add as many as 2,000 jobs to that facility. These are high-paying jobs that would be really transformational for our community. The federal government it's in the president's budget for someplace on the East Coast. I participate on a committee with Ms. Rolfe as we look to try to advocate for this with others. There's some indication that the federal government may be asking for a local match from the state to make us competitive. So we're going to ask state support for that initiative. We also offer up support for offshore wind, economic development, site readiness. We've seen a lot of funding in that space that we've taken advantage of as a region. Would like to see that continue through the Go Virginia program. We've heard loud and clear that we need to oppose and reject legislation that would impose new unfunded mandates on you and new fiscal responsibilities on local governments, that you just can't take on more of those things, and that we keep our eye on those type of proposals and object to them. Under public meeting notices, and several of your CAOs have brought this up, currently, many times land use cases have to be advertised in the classified section in the newspapers at extreme cost to your localities. And we've even heard some really unfortunate circumstances where the ads aren't published. You have to cancel public hearings and public meetings. It slows down the approval process, not to mention the financial impacts on you. Not a whole lot of us read the classified sections anymore, and your CAOs really think there's a better way through electronic meeting notices to really not only save money, but reach more people and have that be authorized by the General Assembly. And then finally, you heard Shanita talk about housing, and we want to be able to support programs and policies that support housing opportunities for all as presented by Ms. Bethea. So Madam Chair, I went quickly. I'm sorry for the lengthiness, but I have listed here the full list of the proposed regional legislative priorities. A lot of you have been involved with preparing these through your work on the various committees. Madam Chair, I'll pause and see if there's any questions or conversation.
Thanks, Bob. I also wanted to highlight and thank specifically the legislative folks from all the municipalities who participated in so many of the meetings and were really, really helpful. So to that crew, many of whom are sitting in the back, thank you for all of your efforts, and thank you for helping us during the General Assembly session too. I'll open it up for comments from commissioners or questions. Everybody is just so wowed by these. All right. Okay, well then I'll entertain a motion to approve these legislative priorities for 2023 as presented.
Motion to approve Bobby Dyer.
Second.
Virginia Beach has got a good duo going on there. Thanks, guys. Appreciate
They
that.
dynamic duo.
There we go.
I'm sorry, Ms. Arledge, did you catch those?
Mayor Dyer and Delcino Miles. Okay. Any other further discussion? Hearing none. All those who approve signify by saying aye. Any opposed? Okay, the motion passes. Those will be our legislative priorities.
Thank you.
Thank you. Real quickly, closing out the agenda, there's a 3-month tentative schedule. In your packet, the next meeting will be November 17th. There are meeting minutes included in the packet for the Community Advisory Committee and the Hampton Road CAO Committee as well. There are summaries, excuse me, for the Technical Advisory Committees for Ask HR Green, the Coastal Resiliency Committee, and the Regional Environmental Committee. And any correspondence that we've received is also in there as well. Any old business to be considered by the commission? Any new business? Hearing none, we will see you in November. Happy Halloween.